Hi, buddy. I do hope you can see me and indeed hear me. So I'm just waiting for you. Hello, Bridget Hale, and everybody else that's no doubt about to pop up. Greetings, one and all. I hope you're well. This Sunday we're journeying in. So my hair's a right mess, isn't it? I didn't really plan that very long. So hello, Joanne. Hello, Michelle. See and hear you well. Fantastic. Sadly, you can probably see what a mess my hair is. Hi, Lynn. Hi, Lethargy. And David Howarth with us. Hello, David. Good of you to join us. David, you're Yorkshire, aren't you? Is it David from Scarborough? Hello, John from Florida joining us. And Janice as well, Natalie. So I think we're about on kind of 6 o'clock. So let us do a spin round and you can have a little look at what we saw. So hopefully we're going to get a nice dramatic sunset as we kind of walk along. And so we are on Sutton Bank. Accrington, that's right, David. Accrington, of course it is, yes, of course. So we're on the edge of the North Yorkshire Moors National Park. And this is kind of one of the high points in the kind of Hambleton Hills where we are now. Perhaps best known for the view we're going to look at the end that James Herriot called the finest view in England. I'm not sure I'd kind of go with that, but there's some fantastic views in England, in the Dales as well. But also a hellishly steep road up here that has many motorists kind of breaking out in a cold sweat. But there's lots and lots to see and lots of fascinating history up on Sutton Bank. So I'm going to share that with you. But even though this is not a great angle for you to see, I thought we'd start here this time because the 4G seems to have pitched up. I don't know what you can see, but you're sort of able to see sort of white stone. What we're actually looking at, believe it or not, is a white horse. And it isn't kind of terribly easy to see exactly what you're looking at from there. So let me give you a shot of actually what it looks like if you were a few miles away from here. Because this is a kind of a view, if you like, that is characterises this kind of part of the world. In fact, when you leave kind of York by rail, heading to the northeast, very, very quickly you'll see this, and you can see it for many, many miles because it is beautifully kind of obviously very, very white up on the hillside. And so this is the famous white horse where we are now of Sutton Bank. And so let me just get rid of that for you. So that is what this white kind of gravel is looking at here. And until recently, I mean, they're very, very old, these kind of white horses. But until recently, there was kind of three methods were used to kind of construct these hill figures. First is the stripping method, and this is where you got chalk under the surface, the soil's thin, you literally just strip away the turf of the soil to expose the chalk underneath. And this gets quick results, but needs kind of regular maintenance. It will soon become kind of overgrown. So this was the original kind of practice for hill figures, but not so much for the English horses. The Laverstock Panda at Laverstock near Salisbury in Wiltshire is constructed this way in 1968 and it's already lost. So it shows it doesn't kind of really last over a long period of time. So traces of figures of this type are not usually found after the figure is kind of overgrown. You've got a second method called the covering method. And this is where rocks are placed on top of the turf. And this method is normally used where there's kind of no underlying chalk, or the chalk is deep, or there's not kind of tools available. And the maintenance for these kind of figures is again very, very high. And there's several examples of this, the Woolbury White Horse at Hampshire. And again, this method leaves no kind of trace of the figure's existence when overgrown. As is the case of the lost Favant badgers in Wiltshire. So it's a very, very kind of difficult thing to kind of set up and to maintain to have them last a long time. The final method is what they call a trenching method. And that's what's being used here. This is where the underlying chalk, where some white horse are constructed, is not near the surface. So a trench is dug and chalk from another site is used to fill it. So the most famous one of these is the Uffington White Horse in Wiltshire. And this is the one that kind of beautiful, very early English. I'm sure many of you will kind of recognise this white horse. Hello, Reverend Doc. So a classic kind of Celtic symbolism. So this kind of uses this method. But it obviously it's kind of invasive, but it does allow traces of the figure to be seen even when it's overgrown, because obviously it's leaving a scar quite literally into the kind of landscape. So the white horse here is, let me just bring you up another image of the white horse, so remind me how to do this. So let me just show you what it is that we've got here. As I say, I could have started at the bottom, but A, I ran out of time, and B, by the time I got to the top, I'd have been so out of puff, I wouldn't be able to talk for about kind of 10 minutes. So that's what you're looking at here. That's just in front of us where we are now. And it's 314 feet long, it's 228 feet high, and about 20 people could stand on the grass island which forms the eye. Though you're not allowed to walk on the thing now, so I'll give you a close-up. We're just by the eye now, actually. Let me just get that down. There we go. Yeah, so we're just around the head, and it's very, very difficult to kind of see. But it's really strongly discouraged. And so what you can see is now they've replaced and they put kind of gravel on top of the horse to kind of keep it in some kind of. It's actually grey. Looks white from the hillside from a distance, but it's actually grey. So the biggest threat really to white horse is vegetation, though. It's the kind of growing weeds. So actually maintaining these things is a devil's own job. It really sort of takes a lot of doing. It faces south-southwest and visible from a long distance, say from the train. You can see it for many a mile. It's a real kind of landmark of the kind of North Yorkshire moors. So we're just near Thirsk, and the A19 roadway is also lovely visibility on us, looking out. So you can see this on a good day from Leeds, so 28 miles away on higher ground, and anywhere from sort of west from the Vale of York, you can see it kind of looking all the way out. So it really is a very distinctive feature of the landscape, but we're right on top of it, so you can't see a great deal of it. So let me show you the information board they've prepared for us over here. So you're going to see now the route that we are about to walk. So we're going to walk around this route here, from Ralston Scar, and across to the end by the National Park Centre. So that's what it looks like. That's where we are right now. So we'll see the gliders. We're walking past a bit about the World War II gliders as we go past. But that's where we are. And the last time we were here, actually, funny enough, I don't know if anybody remembers, was one of the very last tours that I did on Hago. Not quite the last, but I did 2 tours, one here and one at Hawes, to celebrate my 2 years of virtual touring. So this means now, last week, I think the 21st of March was the anniversary. It is now 3 years. So I've been spouting my particular brand of nonsense now for 3 years. So bless you all for still sticking around to listen to it. But I've not been here for a year, so I kind of figured, well, how nice to come back again and use it as an excuse. So look at that sun now. We're hopefully going to get a nice visual treat for us by way of a sunset. So we're going to kind of walk along now the pathway. It's kind of nice and level and easy. So hopefully it should be fairly easy going for me to walk and chat. I'll try and give you as much of a perspective as possible. But obviously it is most famous really for just its sheer height to Sutton Bank and the kind of visibility. So getting views right the way across the kind of Vale of York, the Vale of Mowbray, and when we get round to the end point, right across to the Yorkshire Dales, and in the far distance, the Lake District. So it really is a beautiful, where's the chat gone? Have you stopped chatting, or is it disappeared? Anyway. There we go. Enjoyed every minute. Fantastic. Wonderful, Nosty. Thank you so much. I momentarily switched off the chat, so I couldn't sort of see what you were saying there, so I wasn't ignoring you. But isn't that wonderful, that sun? Isn't that fantastic? And what we know is, so going back to hill figures, they've been kind of creating these since prehistory. They could be animals, human forms. Some of you may be aware of the Cernabus giant, of course, famously. This one back here is not that old. It dates to 1857. It was a school teacher that decided to create the white horse on the landscape. And cutting of horses is very, very common, as well, of course, as abstract symbols. There's been advertising campaigns done, using it, kind of creating these things overnight and then unveiling them. So, hello, Marlene. It's kind of quite the thing, really, to create a hillside view. But I say horses overwhelmingly most popular, and there's a couple of dozen in England. I don't know if they are kind of elsewhere as well, but they're quite wonderful. So we showed you the Uffington horse kind of before, and that's kind of the most sort of famous of them on a record cover, XTC, if any of you know that English settlement. So that is the kind of the classic English horse, and that probably dates to the Iron Age. I'll just show you that one more time. So this is likely to be an Iron Age portrayal. So a wonderful kind of example of horses in motion. I never remember when I saw that horse. Okay, done. So this is down in Wiltshire, but Sutton Bank, as I say, it's formed of sandstone. So the horse, there was no kind of chalk to expose, so it's created by removing the topsoil and exposing the underlying rock, and then covering it with white limestone chips. So a bit of a cheat really, but it did the job. And it's... What have I done? There we go. Look at that sun, isn't that beautiful? So it's created in November 1857 by a schoolmaster by the name of John Hodgson and his pupils, together with some local volunteers. And there's a tablet at the bottom, which I would have showed you about, it had been so up by the time I got to the top, that says the Kilburn White Horse. This figure was created in 1857 on the initiative of Thomas Taylor, a native of Kilburn. He was a buyer for a London provision merchant, and he seems to have attended a celebration at Uffington White Horse, one I showed you a minute ago, in 1857, and was inspired to give his home village a similar example. So that seems to be the motivation. And it said that 33 men were involved with the cutting of it, and 6 tons of lime were used to whiten the exposed rock. Now in 1925, a restoration fund was subscribed to by the readers of the Yorkshire Evening Post, and they managed to raise £100 to provide for triennial grooming of the figure. So these triennials, is that once every 3 years or 3 times a year? Whatever it is, anyway, that was what they raised the funds to do so. So I'll just pan us across. As you can see, we're getting a wonderful sunset appearing, and over here, what's in the sky there, the moon coming out. So we're definitely at the end of the day here. Now then, during this area, we're coming into the gliders. So if I just kind of pan across here, you'll see there. But this area is very significant insofar as it was used for the training of glider pilots. Now, gliders were used extensively during the Second World War, particularly by American forces. If there's anybody on there with any connections to either American or Canadian Air Force, anybody that was stationed here in the UK had either the invasion of Sicily and Italy, or even more particularly D-Day and France and Normandy, may well have been involved in gliders, because gliders were a key part of the invasion strategy, basically dropping troops behind the enemy lines in order to be able to create bridgeheads and support then the invasion attempt. So on the day before D-Day, hundreds of gliders were towed from here, other parts of England, across to northern France, and they dropped in behind enemy lines. And so this area was very, very significant because it was used to train them. Because obviously you've got very high surface, you've got a low sort of flat airfield over here, and so lots and lots of service personnel got their first go, if you like, at flying gliders from up here on Sutton Bank. And it's still a major gliding centre, so they come from all over the country to fly from here. Wonderful therms, kind of great flying, and of course very, very dramatic kind of scenery. Important role because being dropped behind the lines, obviously, and so this happened on, here's a picture that was taken on the 5th of June, so the day before D-Day. There's the gliders, they're going to be towed in, and they're going to drop in behind the lines in France, ready with supplies, ammunition, troops to support the guys coming off the beaches to provide. Okay, and this is about, they landed about 20 miles from Utah Beach. If any of you got relatives land at Utah, this was kind of supporting the landings at Utah Beach. So it really was a kind of very, very important part of the war effort. And as I say, that all started here, which I think is lovely. As I say, it's just a very, very good place to... I'm a lot better getting these on than getting rid of them. There we go. This is a very, very good place for training them. So, but they had to cover up, by the way, in Second World War, they also had to cover over the White Horse, going back to the White Horse, because of course it meant it was a a very visible sign, so it had to be covered over during that time to stop kind of bombers using that as a kind of navigational aid, particularly heading up towards Teesside and the ports and the shipbuilding and so forth in the northeast. So it was a particularly sort of dangerous hazard, as you might say. So of course it had to be covered over. Now you might be able to just see over there in the midst of our picture, we've got a road running through, which is obviously the Sutton Bank road, and it's fair to say it's not for the faint-hearted, and it's certainly not for underpowered vehicles. You would certainly struggle. It's a 1 in 4, 25% hill. In other words, every 1 metre you go, every 4 metres forward you go 1 metre up. Pretty steep. So it's going to hold low gear, and I'm going to go for it. You've got to commit and hope that you don't come across some big, ugly wagon coming the other way, which means you have to slow down because you really don't want to be doing that. So it really is, it's a fun drive. It's an interesting drive, should we put it that way. But what a view. Isn't it just fantastic? So the view in front of us, you can see, is kind of very, very flat topped. And this is what they call Ralston Scar. And we know that from excavations, this was the site of a hill fortress going back to the Iron Age. It is, wonderfully flat, and of course it's been sort of treated. It's been kind of flattened, but isn't it fantastic as that? This outcrop, so if you see sort of running almost level right there from the sort of century picture out towards the right. This is Ralston Scar, and we know that this was the site of an Iron Age hill fort. So of course, Iron Age, we're going all the way back, into prehistory, into kind of your BCs, as you might say. And it's one of the most important sites ever excavated. English heritage were actually quite shocked to discover such a huge complex. And what they think was possibly this was a very, very important place in Iron Age society, and may well have been a meeting place where the rival tribes, because we're going back to a time when obviously kind of pre-Roman arrivals, that it was a tribal, it wasn't one nation with one king, distinct areas, the Brigantes, the Parisi, etc., the different tribes of different areas. And they think that Ralston Scar here was used as kind of a neutral ground where they could come and meet and discuss kind of tactics. And there's a kind of chance discovery really by the National Park, which led to a major archaeological investigation here. And it kind of revealed that the whole plateau had at one time been covered by a massive hill fort. So you imagine the size of the fort to kind of cover the sort of out length of this kind of outcrop, which is absolutely enormous. It's believed to date to about 400 BC. So kind of timelines there, we're talking about that 2,500 years ago, somewhere in that kind of region. So 2,500 years ago, this was one of the most kind of impressive sites anywhere in England. Julie's been to Sutton Bank between 2010 and 2012. How fantastic, Julie. I hope you've got happy memories, and this is bringing them back. So we'll look at the lovely colours we're getting in the sky now. Isn't that fantastic? So it covers there about 60 acres, and the perimeter is about 1.3 miles in length. So it kind of comes right out and goes back in. So it's a really good visible place in order to be able to kind of defend. So just coming along here, back to what we were talking about before. As you can see there, we're seeing the glider boxes now. So those little caravan-y things, they're all kind of gliders. So people come up here and they still glide. So it's still very much in operation. Let's do that walk a couple of years ago. Yeah, fantastic. So look at those colours now. Isn't that just beautiful sky? Gorgeous. So we think this was the largest Iron Age fortress of its kind in the north of England, and it could be one of the biggest anywhere in England. So it's located on the western boundary of the North Yorkshire Moors National Park, as it is today, near Thirsk. As you can see, it occupies a kind of naturally strong position, a kind of promontory, great visibility down looking across the Dale. Very, very hard, of course, to attack, very, very easy to defend. So consequently, it's no wonder that this was chosen to be the site that will be used for this kind of massive hill fortress. And you can sort of defend it in every direction, really. It's almost like a kind of redoubt, they called them in the First World War, whereby you can sort of create a defensive line all the way around the hill fortress. So it's no wonder that it was chosen. And you've got these very, very steep valleys either side, kind of cliff edges and so forth. So it's a wonderful natural defensive formation that is in place. Dawn remembers the horse when she was 6. Blimey. If sore legs for a 6-year-old climbing up, the steps up the hillside are very, very short, very steep. So consequently, it's not difficult to get from the car park to the top, but you're so out of puff by the time you get there that I thought, if I do that, I'm going to be coughing and spluttering and choking and not able to really talk a great deal. So consequently, I thought, discretion being the better part of valour, you have a photo instead and have a tour guide that actually talk, rather than see it all up close and personal, but have me passing out and needing resuscitation instead. So, but hopefully see, just getting this kind of canopy of these trees, but again, hopefully you can sort of see the flat profile really of kind of Ralston Scars. So it commands breathtaking views, of course, across the Vale of York and further afield right out to the Yorkshire Dales. It really is a fabulous setting and a fabulous visibility. So isn't that colour in the sky just beautiful? Oh, Julie brought shame on her family by her. But if you're only 6, I suppose we can forgive you for needing a loo break along the way. So as I say, it's now used by the Yorkshire Gliding Club, and part of the sort of southern defences of Ralston Scar were unknowingly cut through in 1857, of course, when they cut the I'm just going to tie my shoelace. When they cut the white horse. So as with all these things, the white horse are beautiful, but they can be quite destructive. So that's better. Sorry about that. So there's kind of suspicions that there was still evidence of a site fortress in the middle of the 19th century when the Ordnance Survey mapped some earthworks. But you see, they disappeared. So whether that was a farmer rather kind of naughtily getting rid of stuff, because farmers are afraid to have form in getting rid of things that don't necessarily cater to value in a historical sense. So the Cardo died. But nonetheless, we know enough about this site to be able to excavate it and to know the kind of the history of it. And the kind of examination that was done by English Heritage, their kind of field investigators, they look at obviously the earthworks, the humps, the bumps, the ditches, the banks, the kind of artificial shaping of it, the landscaping, as you might say. And it extends out much, much further than anyone previously thought, kind of around that full circuit of the promontory. So this is when they got the sense of kind of the size of this, the scope of this medieval hill fort was so much bigger than anybody had previously envisaged, was basically because they were able to trace the earthworks, where trenches had been dug, where defences had been in place, and so forth. And where they do exist, the defensive trenches, they're up to a height about 3 metres. So it's pretty impressive still. You can dig down 3 metres. And what they've been able to do, of course, as well, is these days do stuff from the sky. Shoot satellites. So global positioning equipment. I don't know if you're aware of this sort of technology, but they use it an awful lot in archaeology these days. And they have like kind of rods, measuring rods on the ground. And then send a signal up to a satellite, which brings back down again and measure the distance. As you go around tracing with your rod, it then maps out a 3D image of the landscape. It is very, very clever. So that's been able to give us a great deal of understanding, if you like, of the terrain of that landscape, but also, of course, to what degree it was shaped by man rather than kind of by nature. And they were, say, very surprised to discover the site and the scale of this kind of complex up here. There'd kind of been tantalising clues over the years, but until they kind of carried out this geophysical survey, there wasn't the full understanding of what was there. And it's thought that it was created by the Brigantes. So the Brigantes were the tribe that were in this part of the country, Northern Britain. Thank you, Julie. Before the arrival of the Romans, the Brigantes were the folk that were in charge. But it also may be to do with the Parisi tribes, although they tend to be located more towards the Wolds, into East Yorkshire. And the Parisi tribe, of course, are believed to be linked to the people that created Paris. So a nice link there between France and England. So obviously this was a very, very impressive kind of defensive bastion. Also offered, of course, a place of refuge in times of trouble. And of course, to build on this kind of scale was, you know, lots of it you'd be amazed what our heads full of. The amount of labour it would have taken to kind of construct on this kind of scale is kind of mind-blowing. It probably would have taken several years to build. Would have taken, thank you, Natalie. Would have taken vast quantities of timber, and also it makes us sort of think then about the social organisation. That kind of workforce 2,500 years ago. We know in Egypt and the Romans, slave labour was used. We've got very little knowledge of Iron Age Britain because they weren't really a literate society insofar as that there's no kind of written records of culture. So here we go, our first kind of gap in the trees. So you can see now down, obviously Gormire Lake down there at the bottom. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Ralston Scar. So you can really see what a commanding view this is across this landscape. What a fantastic place to pick to defend. So excavations in 1969 and 70 had previously indicated that the main northern earthwork comprised of a 2-metre deep trench and a big series of ramparts fronted by timber palisades, like a fort. And it was probably about 4 metres in height and topped with a defensive walkway. So probably not dissimilar to the walkway that we're going around now. And as I say, they were able to trace the full extent of the defensive circuit, about 1.3 miles, where there's been artificial steepening. So they can look obviously at the landscape and find, you know, which is a natural rock formation, but what has been created by a labour force to create a more defined landscape, steeper slopes, so again, of course, making it much, much harder to be attacked. So there would be a long ditch that went right the way around the promontory, and as I say, with timber palisades, so we're like a classic sort of fort. The light's going down now, but hopefully you're getting the kind of vibe. And we think that the main entrance would have been at this end of the northern rampart, but also on the other side of the southeastern corner, where the defences themselves are kind of turning in on themselves to kind of create the circle of the fort. And it's a place marked by a series of trackways that we're going to come out in the last part of this walk, close to the line of the kind of present road. So as well as being a defensive sort of bastion, archaeologists think it may have been a kind of statement of power, possibly kind of housing the Iron Age equivalent of a regional assembly. So kind of coming together of the gathering of the tribes, as you might say. It would have taken, you know, huge amounts of labour, as we say, to build. I don't know how well you can see given this light, but it's actually a little bit mistier than I thought it was going to be today. It's very, very clear, but it's actually quite atmospheric, just having that little bit of a haziness in and around the beautiful sun-setting skies. So nice to have the bench, absolutely. You can sit down and gaze out Marlena. Obviously, we're on a timetable, so I'm going to keep us moving. But it's the Gormire Lake, you're just supposed to see sort of just to the right of the centre of your picture. Beautiful inland ice age lake from glacial meltwater. But look at that, isn't that just beautiful? John, have I been to Crake before? Right, I have, and if John Ford is on still, I took John and his charming lady wife, Karen, to Crake. We visited the church there, and we talked to somebody who may well have been related to one of their ancestors, or at least knew them. So that was fantastic. If John is still on, but that was absolutely fabulous. Lovely, beautiful village. We'll probably go there one day on our Pretty Villages tour. Crake is absolutely lovely, near Easingwold. So yes, we have been to Crake, and very nice it is too. So if John's on, I'm sure he'll bob up and say yes. No, we'll get lost in this. No, I think we're okay because there's a nice path for us to kind of follow. So it's kind of brilliant, isn't it, to imagine this sort of place of this gathering of the tribes up here in northern Britain, kind of North Yorkshire. Oh, fabulous day we are, John. We went from place to place, didn't we? Across North Yorkshire, visiting churchyards and villages and I can't remember, do Helms we went to, didn't we, in the end? But a lovely day, really fabulous day out. And that's the beauty of coming to York and having access to a car. As lovely as York is, you want to get out and about as well and see all the fabulous villages and everything are kind of rounded about. So heartily recommend it for anybody who wants to come to this part of the world. What are we talking about? Yes, so, you know, we think it probably takes several years to have built this. We're talking about 10,000 cubic metres of earth and rock and about 3,000 trees have been cut down to build this thing. But what's interesting is given the excavation they've done, they haven't found much traces of people living here for a long time, which is why there's this suggestion that it might have been a kind of more neutral point, a place where they could all come, but it wasn't. It was kind of not no man's land. That's the wrong way of putting it, isn't it? You know, like a neutral territory where it wasn't occupied, so they weren't kind of on somebody else's turf. So that kind of be interesting if that was the case, because generally speaking, when you've got these, you know, big fortified settlements, you're going to have a very significant population living there, and when you've got that, of course, you're going to find archaeology when you dig. You're going to find basically everything, you know, from ashes from fires. You're going to find bones, aren't you? You're going to find combs. You're going to find brooches. You're going to find coins. You might find poo. All sorts of things you're going to find to evidence of human settlement, animal remains and so forth. You might find hair. You might find things to do with weaving. You might find pots and pans and plates and forks. They haven't found much here, so it does suggest that this wasn't a long-term place of sort of human settlement. That actually it may well have had a kind of spiritual importance. So it may well have had, you know, a fairly modest number of people living here, but people coming and visiting, making pilgrimages, if you like, to visit. So what's fantastic is, you know, is the not knowing or not knowing yet. But, you know, like when I was doing the Jewish tour the other day, if you haven't seen, that's on my YouTube channel. Do subscribe, by the way. We're finding out stuff all the time, which is so exciting to have this new knowledge just sort of pops up. It transforms us. So who knows? We could find out in the next decade news about Ralston Scar. But here, by the way, is a memorial to those that lost their lives. Hello, Helene. I was talking earlier about the Air Force. So this is a plaque to all the Allied nations who lost their lives in the surrounding countryside. Not least the crew of the Halifax bomber, which crashed on May the 5th, 1943. So again, a major area. So any of you guys say that they had relatives, ancestors in the US Air Force, the Army Air Force, the Canadian Air Force, people coming over here, based over here, ahead of D-Day, may well have spent time here. So it's always nice to kind of trace the roots of where people were, because of course, you know, Britain was absolutely full to the brim of service personnel from across from the Atlantic, billeted all over the place. But I say this was to do with the Air Force. So if you've got people in your family that were US Air Force, Canadian Air Force, you know, or any of the Allies Air Forces, there's a really good chance they may well have spent time here, because this was a major centre. So here and right the way across East Yorkshire, full of airfields where all the Lancaster bombers, the Halifax bombers all took off from incredibly sort of flat land. So there, RAF Leeming flew Halifax, so Julie knows. So basically, of course, you fly these from the flat areas. So it's wherever you've got, you know, kind of very, very flat landscapes, you know, you can create then, obviously, the conditions to fly. So there's Gormire Lake below us. And Gormire Lake, by the way, is created by meltwater. So just going back to the hill fortress, which is now, as you can sort of see behind us. So we know it was a permanent settlement. But we also have an idea. Ignatius, who has a very kind of significant relationship with York, actually, and he built it as part, it's said, of his anti-road defences. And if this is the case, that would be kind of absolutely awesome. I'm just going to stand here a sec, because it was used alongside what's called Cleeve Dyke. And Cleeve Dyke is amazing. It's a huge ditch created by prehistoric volcanic activity. Chat video's frozen. Oh dear. And hopefully we'll be back up very shortly. And the igneous rock kind of extends from Galloway in southern Scotland through Cumbria and County Durham into northern England and the North Yorkshire moors in North Yorkshire. And I'll just show you a picture of the gap. It really is quite incredible. So it really is a big sort of wedge that runs right the way through. Are we still frozen? Oh, chat's come through. So this is the kind of gap. So it's believed that taking advantage of the gap, which is this, the Cleve Gap, which is a big, obviously defensive, absolutely fantastic for defending, and Ralston Scar are forming part of the defences that were Venetius, and Venetius was, sorry. Get off. So Venetius was basically the husband of Queen Carta-Mundra. And Queen Carta-Mundra was the lady that, if you like, is most associated with the foundation of York, which is pretty awesome, insofar as that she was the queen of the Brigantes. And it's quite amazing, isn't it, that a queen then, rather than a king, but it's absolutely true. So Queen Carta-Mundra, Regina the Romans called her, so they recognised her noble birth. She was the queen, and this was a time of uprisings. The Romans had arrived, they'd conquered most of the south of England, through the Midlands, to Wales, and they're kind of working up the country. They got as far as Lincoln. But the north held firm against the Romans. Yeah, some kind of, it's sort of a fog, I suppose. It's very light, but it is definitely there. There's a kind of mist in the air, but I think it makes it sort of quite ethereal, quite dramatic, as you might say. So look at there. You can see now how Ralston Scar is like an absolute flat top. It's amazing what they've kind of done with it. So we think that this was kind of part of Venetius's defence, basically, against the Romans. And so Venetius was the kind of first century king of the Brigantes in northern Britain at the time of the conquest. It's believed he belonged to a tribe called the Carvetti, which formed part of the kind of Brigantes confederation. But history we first become aware of him as the husband of Queen Carta-Mundra in about AD 51. And this is after the British resistance leader Caractacus was defeated by the Roman army in Wales. So just to get a little primer on this, the Romans had arrived in AD 43 under Claudius. So forget Julius Caesar, who just came out a little paddle in 45 BC. It was 55 BC, wasn't it? But the main invasion of Britain was 100 years later, in AD 43 under Claudius, and that was the conquest of Britain. But coming for assets, lead, tin, copper, gold, things you can dig out of the earth and kind of turn into cash, there wasn't much of that in the north. So consequently, they focused on the south. Fletcher's got a messer here in text. Thank you, Janice. That's very interesting. A messer. I like that. So basically, there was a series of uprisings against the Romans. Kind of a rebel alliance kind of came together because the Romans were taxing. And there's no better ways that have been proven over history to upset people than layering heavy taxes upon them. And so an uprising sort of blows up first with Boudica. I'm sure you've heard of Boudica, the Iceni in East Anglia, and that almost succeeds in knocking the Romans out. You then get the Caractacus in London, another major rebellion. And again, the Romans are completely caught off guard. They're kind of unprepared for kind of what's going to happen. But again, they managed to put down this rebellion. But it just kind of moves like a whack-a-mole. You can deal with it in one area, and it just pops up again in another. So Caractacus fled north to the Brigantes. So he goes to Queen Carta-Mundra, basically the proposition to say, look, if we join forces, we've got enough sort of firepower, if you like, to drive the Romans out. We can really kind of succeed here. And so she's in a kind of a difficult position, is Carta-Mundra, because she's got to deal with the Romans. The Romans are really good at what they call kind of like divide and rule sort of tactics, insofar as that what they'll say is, look, there's going to be a time when you're going to need our support, our help. Here by the we're passing the site of the Battle of Pennine in 1322, by the England versus the Scots Wars of Independence in 1322, was fought here. And so they did deals with the tribal leaders, which basically said, if you need military assistance, we'll provide it for you, but in the meantime, you'll allow us to carry on our business, which is basically exploitation of assets, digging, mining, etc. And so Queen Cartamundra had a deal like this with the Romans, that she could call on them for insurance should she need it. So Caractacus arrives in the court of Queen Cartamundra and says, join us, turn your back on these evil Romans that are here just to bloodsuckers, join forces with us, we'll put down the Romans, and then we can enjoy the spoils, we can enjoy the riches, rather than forever kowtowing, if you like, to the Romans. And Venetius, her husband, or rather estranged husband, is very, very keen for Cartamundra to commit the force of the Brigantes to fight against the Romans. But it's rather complicated by the fact that Cartamundra and her husband are in effect estranged. We're just crossing the A170, the main road now, to try to get run over. And so consequently, she is now also seeing this rather dishy chariot driver by the name of Velacticus. And they all hate him, because as far as the British generals are concerned, the upper elite of the British military forces, he's a glorified taxi driver that is now sharing the Queen's bedchamber. He's getting all manner of kind of preferment and benefits, and they think he's a chav, basically. They think he's a wrong 'un. And so they really hate Velacticus. But nonetheless, Queen Cartamundra is quite clearly very attached to him, and as a result of this, he is a Roman. So she is, I suppose, a pillow talk, would you call it? She decides to go with Velacticus. She decides to say no to her ex-husband Venetius, say no to Caractacus. She's not going to join the rebellion. And so Caractacus, instead of being the head of an alliance, is handed over to the Romans in chains by the Queen. And that went down about as well as you could imagine. Civil war broke out. Cartamundra is deposed. She's no longer the Queen. And she calls upon the Romans to come to her aid. And the Romans are really cross. We know this because there's a wonderful source. This story that could have been lost so easy to history is wonderfully preserved, because it just so happens that at this time there was a chap who was in this part of the country, and he was writing a book. He was writing a book about Agricola, who was the German, who was the governor of Britain, and he was his father-in-law as well. And so he wrote about all this stuff and how basically the Romans really resented coming up here, because they felt it was like a marital tiff. They felt they were getting involved in a spat between a man and his wife. So we've got this wonderful story called Agricola that kind of tells us all about this. But this is where Cartamundra drops out of history. We don't hear from her again. Presumably he goes off with Velacticus. They live happily ever after with the Romans somewhere. Because of course ultimately the Romans do succeed. But you can see with this landscape here what a hugely tough job it was for the Romans. And the Romans did not like this one bit. So Tacitus, by the way, is the name of the author, I should have mentioned. So to the Romans, it was an imposition. It was the wrong part of the country. There was nothing here for them. They were being pulled away from, if you like, the warmth and the comfort. And they never really settled in the north of England. Northern Britain remained an outpost. As we know, York was built to become the foundation, the fortress of northern England. And that's as far north as the Romans ever got. So the Romans never took Ralston Scar. They never took this part of the country. Of course, they built Hadrian's Wall, about 50, 60 miles north of here, and treated that as the end of the world, the end of civilization. But they never actually got really as far as this. So Ralston Scar was incredibly effective. As we sort of spin round, we're now looking over what's the finest view, but of course with this mist and the low light, it's not as dramatic as perhaps it might be. We turn round and look at Ralston Scar from here. It's remarkable, I think, to think that this is the hill fort that defeated the Romans. So Marlon asks, when did the Romans leave? 450. Yeah, you're not too far off there. We think about 410, 409, 410, different areas, different times. And of course, there was different kind of pressures upon them. We need a time to talk about Romans. I see now, fantastic, Michelle. So yeah, I think from here, you really get this sense of quite how impenetrable this landscape is. You know, but isn't that flat top? Isn't that just amazing? So Julie's Wall, most of Hadrian's Wall. So Hadrian's Wall, for those that kind of aren't familiar with it, basically is you know, a defensive structure that was put in place to do two things. One was to, if you like, create a hard end to the Roman Empire. So the Hadrian's Wall, obviously the Antonine Wall a bit later on, but that was abandoned very quickly. So Hadrian's Wall became, if you like, the sort of the permanent end of the wall, as far north in Europe as it ever went. It served two purposes. So one, of course, was a defensive barrier. But the second was, probably even more important, was to keep apart the Picts, or the Scots you might call them now, and Northern Britons, because they knew how tough it was to try and deal with rebellion in this part of the country. So in putting Hadrian's Wall in between them, in effect they created a hard barrier that prevented the unification of the tribes of the northern England and the border areas of Scotland of coming together to give the Romans a drubbing. So it has these two kind of purposes. So we're now looking right the way out across the valley. So we've got Ralston Scar on our left hand side. We've got Hood Hill, you just sort of see poking up from the kind of mist there in the centre of your picture now. There was a Motte and Bailey Castle. We talked about Motte and Bailey castles a lot, didn't we, in our Midland tour. So again, I've just got that image that I shared with you the other day that a few of you liked. So this is what a kind of Motte and Bailey castle would look like. So the Hood Hill in front of us, that's, you imagine, see the wooden keep up at the top and a bailey around, so kind of where the fields are at the bottom. You'd have had an enclosed area, defensive area. So that stood where we are now. Oops. So you've got Hood Hill, and into the distance we've got Menwith Hill, which is where the American Air Force base is. So again, if anybody's relations that not so much at the Second World War, but still in, we've got American bases over here. And then over this side, we're looking out now, and again, and it's too dark for you to be able to see, we can see Gormire Lake in the foreground, so that sort of circular lake, hopefully you can sort of see over there. And then the hill range in the background of what you can see is Wensleydale. So that gives you a sense of, on a clear day, you can see a good 30 or 40 miles from here, and beyond that, on really clear days, you can then see the backdrop of the lakes, which is, oh, Michael's on from Virtual New Zealand. So, you know, it's getting a bit dark for us now to be able to get with any kind of definition, but what a spot we have up here. Isn't it just an absolute kind of delight? So as I say, this is, the landscape that was simply too much for the Roman forces. They give up. So York becomes the behind the lines, the place of kind of comfort, the fortress city. But in effect, they don't really seek to try and control this landscape because it's too wild, it's too difficult. And the people are just not interested in working with the Romans. So perpetual, like Asterix, remember the Asterix books as a kid? You know, it was about kind of rebellion and pushback. And people, you know, they're described as kind of an inward, miserable people, much kind of given to drinking. Are these kind of ancient Britons? The Romans just can't work with the Northerners, the Brigantes and these tribes. They just think they're kind of primitive, savage, brutal, uneducated, uncultured, and that it's too cold, you know. For people on the Dolce Vita, it's worth remembering, you know, that the soldiers that were here in northern Britain were, of course, brought from southern Europe, because the idea of the Romans was always, whenever they captured new territory, they'd try and keep as many of the enemy warriors alive and then bring them into the Roman army, so bringing new fighting techniques and new abilities in, but then move them away so they couldn't get involved in local kind of you know, rebellions and so forth. So consequently, the 9th Legion that were here, and then the 6th Legion, were Spanish, Greek, Italian, Southern European. So, you know, you can imagine how much they really didn't like the cold, the wet, the rain, the winds, the landscape. Southern softies, absolutely complete Southern softies. You know, they just felt cold all the time. I love the story that says that they invented socks about Hadrian's Wall, because of course they had the open sandals, didn't they? The Romans. They say Italian men are meant to be stylish, aren't they? But they invented sandals and socks. That's a true story, apparently. So they came up kind of wrapped up. And it was a thoroughly miserable posting for these people to be up here. So you can kind of imagine that actually, round here, even in the midst of what we call the Roman occupation, this was Britannia's last stand. This was a place that remained defiantly British right the way through the period of Roman occupation. And still to the modern day, Yorkshire, very, very independent, as you'll know, very proud, tough, resilient people. Not a lot of money here for long periods of time. The money concentrated in the hands of very, very few. So people living tough, basic lives, farming in these landscapes. But very resilient, very independent. And I am delighted and very proud to be part of that. So as you can see, the light is coming down here. I'm just going to give us another minute or two because I'm loving just watching the beauty of it. But I'm aware that you probably can't pick out by much by way of kind of detail. So James Herriot, of course, lest we forget, was a chap called Alf White, actually a Glasgow bloke. People think of him as Yorkshire, he's actually from Glasgow. He came down in the 1930s to become a vet, but from Glasgow, I guess he was already pretty toughened up. And we think about James Herriot as the Yorkshire Dales, but actually it's the Yorkshire Moors, which are very similar. It's just two different national parks side by side. So his surgery was up at Thirsk, which again we went to with John and Karen. There's a museum there, it's well worth a visit. So James Herriot, the author Alf White, declared this to be the finest view in England. And I don't know if I agree with him or not. We've got an awful lot of very strong kind of contenders. But I think given everything that he did, Alf White, to promote this part of the country. Yeah, James Herriot Museum is in Thirsk, absolutely. So the veterinary surgery has been kind of changed into a museum. So it's kind of halfway in between a kind of museum about the kind of TV series, but also about being a country vet. So it's kind of merged sort of between the two. But I think he's earned the right. He's done an awful lot to kind of put us on the map. And I know that certainly for those of you on the other side of the Atlantic, you know, he is a major kind of literary figure, you know, that has done an awful lot to kind of popularise Yorkshire and make people very interested in Yorkshire and want to kind of find out. And of course, you know, it's always, isn't it, about rural areas. And that's what kind of really defines Yorkshire. Of course, we have some fine, fine cities, but actually it's places like this that are predominantly rural, village-based, that is much more characteristic of Yorkshire, and particularly North Yorkshire, than the cities. So lots of big fans of James Herriot and his stories. Is there a James Herriot Museum or something in Askrigg? Not that I'm aware of. So Askrigg, up near Hawes, so that'd be over that way. So other side of that tree, plus about 30 miles, we'll be into kind of Wensleydale, so Askrigg near Aysgarth Falls and town of Hawes. Isn't that a beautiful shot? I like that. I like that a lot. So I'm not aware of anything at Askrigg. There may well be, Julie, but I haven't been to Askrigg for a while. So, you know, don't take me as gospel on that, but not that I know of, is my answer. But as I say, his practice, so it's obviously written about as kind of, you know, as James Herriot and Secret Farnham, was in this area. So Gothland now, fantastic Gothland, I'm glad you mentioned that, we're going to go there this summer. Gothland Teresa is on the moors near Whitby, so between where we are now and Whitby. And that was very famously used for a TV show called Heartbeat. Now, I don't know to what degree that was syndicated around the world, but that's a really popular show about the adventures, a bit of fish out of water type sort of TV show about a young London policeman who upends and ends up in the countryside of North Yorkshire in the 1960s. Very pretty, very kind of cosy TV. You like Call the Midwife and James Herriot, you'd like Heartbeat. It's a similar sort of feel-good vibe. So again, we'll go to Gothland, I think, this summer at some point. And yeah, famous for Harry Potter as well. So the Gothland station was used as a station for Hogsmeade Station. So any Harry Potter fans on, that's that highlight. So I think the light is kind of coming down. So we will, yeah, you'll love it. Definitely, Marlene. It's definitely your sort of thing. If you like things that are just, you know, heartwarming, you know, kind of happy endings. It's not edgy at all. You know, it's just sort of fun. A little bit of kind of romance. You know, the criminals are more rogues. It's much more about, yeah, if you like Emmerdale, that sort of thing. You know, so you know, the bigger crimes are kind of poaching and so forth, rather than kind of serious crimes to kind of investigate. So an awful lot of it really is a very fond look, really, but of kind of times gone by in a world that kind of no longer exists. But that's kind of none the worst, is it? A bit of escapism. There's enough reality to turn on a news show and crikey, you know, the news that we're confronted with on a daily basis around the world, I think we're all entitled to a bit of kind of feel-good, safe, cosy television that's kind of about other stuff. So there we go. It's getting dark, so I think I am going to Tricky Woo, of course. We all remember Tricky Woo. Yeah, 60s music, so Lynn's absolutely right. So of course, all early 60s, if you like, you kind of, you know, you sort of Beatlemania and the what Mersey beat, all that sort of stuff, you know, it's that kind of music, you know, kind of early, maybe 62, 63, 64, 65, that sort of time music. So it's, as I say, it's like wearing a cosy pair of slippers of a TV show, if that kind of makes sense. If that makes any sense whatsoever, you'll know what I mean. You know, it's put your feet up, have a cocoa and a biscuit, and watch it, and it's just like chocolate for the eyes, really. So yeah, so as you can see, thank you, Bridget. You're absolutely bang on there. I mean, it is getting a bit dark, so I think what we'll do is I will give you a little wave. So thank you, everybody who has supported me for these 3 years. My anniversary, I think, was the 21st, so just a few days past that. It's an absolute pleasure to be still doing this. And thank you for everybody who supports me, those that provide tips and monthly contributions. It is so valuable. I'm so grateful. I always get a chance to say thank you. So thank you so much for all your kind support. Thank you for those that follow me. So if you aren't already, give me a follow on this channel. That'd be fantastic. And join the Facebook group, All Points North with John. And do your best as well, if you can, to support Kind of Together virtually. I know it's difficult. I know there's others that are doing their own thing, and that's fine for them. But I do hope you'll support the guys that are trying to make life easier and better for you. So from Yorkshire, celebrating 3 years together. Thank you, John. Thank you, Michelle, Catherine, Linda, Ronnie Lynn, Natalie. Here also got David from Accrington, Helen from Quebec, isn't it? Michael from New Zealand is on. Janice, thank you, Janice. Catherine Miles on with us. Tish is with us. Bridget, Marlena, of course, Mitzi. Hi, Mitzi. Julie, Tish. If I've missed you, I do apologise, but Walpuri, that's an interesting name. Teresa, of course, is with us as well. So thank you so much for joining me here. And Dawn as well. Dawn was with us in North Yorkshire. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon. So from a darkening North Yorkshire, I'll turn around so you can just get me in profile. There we go. That's quite dramatic, isn't it? It's the last of the light. So I'm gonna head back and get back to York and cook tea. Thank you, faithful gathered together. So thank you. And Terry's here as well. And Carla, how lovely. Thank you. So thank you, everybody. It's been 3 years of absolute pleasure. And let's go for a fourth. Bye-bye. See you soon.